Tonight, Purple Pill Philosophy, that's us, me and Brass, is interviewing the host of Modern Day Debate, Jimmy Kunz. How are you, sir?
Very good. Thank you so much. I'm glad to be here.
Had technical difficulties last time, but this time it should be smooth sailing. This was going to be a brief interview tonight because your presence was needed elsewhere, but the debate got canceled, so now you have more time with us.
Yes.
So let's start off by telling us your story about how you became a Christian.
Yeah, so I would say I grew up as some people would even call me Christian, depending on how they would define it. I grew up in a house I believed in a God, and I believed in some Christian, you could say theology, loosely speaking, because I wasn't really reading about it at that point. But I probably, if you would have pushed me, would have been some sort of modernist where I would have maybe said that there is a God and that all religions are true in some way or another. And I would have been some sort of, I think it was for me more about trying to be diplomatic. I thought, what's the most diplomatic, winsome type of religion that I can espouse? And so I probably would have been a pluralist to some degree. So, I would have probably said oh yeah, all religions are true, and, to try to not step on people's feet. Then when I was 20, I kind of went on this spiritual journey, and it was when I started reading the New Testament in particular was when I really started to kind of be drawn to Christianity. And up until then, it was kind of like a building interest in religiosity or spirituality, but only when I started reading the Gospels, and then not too long after apologetics, did I really start to feel like I was getting a grasp of what Christianity is or what the gospel is. And I had a lot of doubts, so that when I did have them, even though I wanted to believe in Christianity and it made me happy, it was really hard. And I thought, well, if this isn't true, it doesn't matter how happy it makes me, because I thought I just still wasn't going to believe it if it's not true. And to be honest, for a while, I had some major doubts when I became a new Christian. I think the biggest doubt was actually believing in the gospel, trusting that I could be saved from my sins, that Christ had paid for it all. But I trusted in that, and kind of to be honest, I don't know if the belief was there at first. It was kind of more of a trust or an acceptance. And after only a while, maybe a year or more, do I think that there was a lot of firm beliefs that surrounded that acceptance or trust. And up until then, it was a lot of tough questions where I almost left Christianity because I thought, like I mentioned before, I was I don't know if this is real. And from what it seemed like, most Christians couldn't offer very good answers until I had run into apologists. And when I found out what Christian apologetics was, I was wow, this is something. I had never heard of this. And that's when I was wow, I'm actually really impressed by these apologists. I feel like they have good arguments, and it was persuasive. And not all of them, to be fair, but many of them were a significant encouragement in my faith as an early Christian.
What apologists in particular?
So it started with more C.S. Lewis, I should say not C.S. Lewis himself, but John Lennox, C.S. Lewis type apologists who weren't quite as analytical. And I think that they're still Ravi Zacharias would be another. And I think that those are, they have a persuasive appeal, but it was William Lane Craig who, with a more analytical approach, I found to be more persuasive. And still, I would say he's definitely one of my favorite defenders of the faith. In terms of debaters, he's got to be my favorite still. In terms of all apologists who are more analytically leaning, he's at least high up there among others, like that I have a lot of respect for, like Swinburne or Plantinga, and so yeah, I definitely tend to lean toward philosophy of religion.
Wasn't too long ago they were collectively targeting Wayne Lane Craig, but they couldn't like criticize him without strawmanning him most of the time.
Right. I think that there's something like really off when a person, especially who has like little experience in philosophy, and they're like, "Oh man, William Lane Craig is so dumb," and I'm like, seriously, like William Lane Craig is published in like the British Journal for the Philosophy of Science. Like he's not a dummy.
They act like Hitchens destroyed him, even though Hitchens lost that debate, and he himself even said so.
I hadn't known that he himself had admitted it.
Yeah.
Really?
Say what you want of the guy, he at least had some integrity for what little
Yeah,
he did.
I mean, that's another thing too. Like, I'm willing to admit that there are times when Christians lose debates. There's even maybe one or two where I'm like, yeah, I don't know if William Lane Craig won that. Like his debate with on ethics. I can't remember. It was he debated like this, like tough philosopher and
his name is
ethicist.
Hmm?
I think his name is
Which one?
I think his last name is like Kruger or something. I know who the guy is. Shelley Keegan, I think.
Shelley Kagan, that's right.
Yeah.
That one, it was like, at best, William Lane Craig had a tie in that debate, and that's at best.
He also lost against Carroll, but that's because he was steeping in outside of his territory in that debate.
Yeah, I think that was a tough debate.
They were both steeping outside of their territory, but Carroll had the upper hand when it came to physics, and Wayne Lane Craig when it came to philosophy and theology.
Yeah, but I think that when atheists try to tell me that Hitchens beat William Lane Craig, I'm like, that's just not even. I couldn't even come close to conceding that. Like it makes me think there's some serious crazy bias going on there because
Hitchens has a cult of personality, even though he was all charming rhetoric and little else.
Yeah, I mean, maybe that's the standard by which they're judging the debate instead of the standards that I would be using.
That's why they also worship. That's why they also worship Dillahunty and Aaron Rod Nelson, even though all they have is rhetoric and like.
Go ahead. So sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
Go ahead.
I think that one of the appeals of those, and the funny thing too is, William Lane Craig could be more popular if he wanted, but William Lane Craig and others like him, whether they be Christian or atheist, because they're so rigorous and analytical, it's difficult for people who aren't as intelligent to keep up. And the simple truth is, like, there just are a lot of people, no matter where you go, that they will find people like Arnon Ra and Matt Dillahunty easier to understand because they are. And when if you recommend to atheists that they read people like high-level atheist philosophers who like
Graham Hoppe,
right, or William,
or Michael Tooley,
right, or William Rowe, some of the classics like J.L. Mackie, who a lot of people would consider Mackie like one of the better philosophers in the last 100 years. That when you recommend these people to atheists and you say, hey, they'd probably be you'd learn a lot tougher of arguments from them than people like Christopher Hitchens, and a lot of times they get mad at you. Like they're like, no, and they reject these high-level philosophers for people like Hitchens or Dillahunty or whoever it is, because frankly, and I'm not trying to knock them. I mean, it's like, that's the trick. Whether you be Christian or atheist, if you are super analytical and rigorous, you're going to lose your audience. And so I think that it helps both in the YouTube algorithms. That's one major way, is that people who can't understand Mackie or whoever it is, like Oppie, they're not going to watch them and their channels or debates, whatever. never really become that popular as a result. Like they don't get boosts in the algorithms, and so
As you can tell by the comments in the atheist experience, like that's still Hunter Aaron Raw, that crowd. Most of those people are not very smart. If you notice.
I think that I mean, we're talking about philosophy, and I think that in some cases, I mean, like R.N. Ra, I think would himself say that his specialty is biology over philosophy. So, I don't want to talk about his biology because I think that he would be a much better. He's much more well read and thought through in biology. And I'm not saying he's even a cruddy philosopher. All I'm saying is that compared to these like high level ones that would be considered very intelligent in the field, that he's obviously easier to understand, and frankly that he and others aren't as rigorous in their thinking. And I'm not as rigorous in my thinking as people like them either, namely like J.L. Mackie, or like I would like dream to be as smart as J.L. Mackie or William Rowe or some of these other like heavy hitter atheist philosophers who are famous in the scholarly world, but pretty unpopular among like you could call it internet atheism.
Yeah. I was wondering, like, speaking of debates and stuff like that, what actually got you into debates? I know originally you weren't even a debate channel. You did a few little videos of your own, and then you sort of switched over to debates. What got you into that?
Yeah, so at first it wasn't. It was primarily apologetics. Like I did usually just modern day hysteria was apologetics. I loved it. It was fun. But I remember telling a friend, I said, I don't really like that in the editing when I would make a video, because I would try to do one video a week, and it was maybe about an hour of editing for each 5-minute video. And I was like, man, because it's something that it wasn't always that easy to like listen to apologetics while I'm editing. And I thought, I wish I could do something where I could both learn and create content at the same time. And so instead of like reading or like listening to an audiobook of apologetics while I'm editing, I was like, well, what if I did like live streams? Because in that sense, like you're kind of editing as it's like loading or streaming. And then I would be able to get to listen to debates. So I mean, like for me, it's like I have to admit, it started as like purely self-interested because I just love getting to listen to other people. But I mean, it was going well. I was getting positive feedback on like the moderating, which is really encouraging. And people were saying like, oh, like you're actually doing a good job of that kind of self-regulation of not taking sides and kind of refraining from the temptation of slanting the debate. And so I was like, well, maybe maybe this is what I'm cut out for. And so I just kind of stuck with it. And it's been so fun though. I think part of it too is I'm more extroverted, and I'm higher on trait openness. So I definitely enjoy people. I love those debates, and I love meeting all sorts of people from all sorts of wild walks of life, and that also connects with the openness, where I love ideas. I'm definitely big on ideas and creative type stuff, so it's been fun that way too.
And I like that you stress that your channel is not an echo chamber like what the non sequitur treehouse club ended up being.
Yeah, I mean, I have to be honest, to be completely real. I do like, it's hard to, I like Steve. It's hard to like Kyle given what it looks like he did. I mean, it's true that we don't have like this final verdict on Kyle, but so at the time, we'll just say this. Everything leading up to what happened this summer, Kyle and Steve were both really helpful for modern day debate, and I liked them, like I got along with them, and I'm thankful that they helped. But I always, sometimes I would think that the non sequitur show would sometimes have, and I'm okay if people want to say that I'm sometimes biased. I'm not claiming to have perfection at it, but I did sometimes think that Non Sequitur Show was biased in favor of atheism.
Well, yeah.
And that was one reason, too, why I thought Modern Day Debate, if I could do it well, would maybe be an alternative. And again, I'm not trying to throw Non Sequitur Show in the dirt because they helped us immensely. I think that it was just that, I mean, like, they themselves would say, like, yeah, we're, like, listed in the top 40 atheist YouTube channels on the internet. Like, they were, like, on, you know, they were considered an atheist channel. So, kind of like a lot of Christian channels.
And that's the funny thing, though. Steve didn't find out until recently it was an atheist channel until I directly confronted Kyle about it, and he outright said it. It's an atheist channel. Steve thought it was from the beginning. Thought it was a channel to express various ideas, and it was at first. Then it just went downhill after that with the ultra SJW anti-Christian shit show.
Yeah, I think that it kind of was both. It's fair to say that both were right, and I think that Steve. I mean, they platform people that were controversial, and that in and of itself does give a lot of credibility to the fact that they did want to discuss ideas of all types, and they were, you know, I think that, like I said, it wasn't like a constant thing. It was generally they were fair discussions. Like,
and then they got to doing a weekly flat Earth debate, which Kyle ended up losing.
You mean like that he debated flat Earth himself, or the idea of like doing it on a weekly basis?
Weekly basis.
Yeah, it was an interesting thing to watch because it was huge every, what was it, Saturday night, right?
Yeah, Flatter Day, yeah.
Yeah, Saturday night fights. And I remember I would tune in, and like weekly, it would be like 600 to 900 people watching a flat Earth debate, and that's pretty big for a channel that size because they were like 20-something thousand.
It was mostly for the laughs. I bet you it's mostly for the laughs.
Yeah, but I mean, it was definitely on fire. But I had heard some people say like you kind of blew your wad with that to be. I'm trying to think of a less crude analogy.
That was the funny thing though. That flat earthers play the same game that anti-theists do with religious people. If I don't feel it, or see it, it's not there.
That's an interesting point.
I mean,
it drove them nuts.
Well, let's get on to the next question because we only actually got through the first question. Well, we got through yours as well, but the next question I got for you, James, is your field is psychology. Last time I checked, how did you get into that, and how does it inform you with your religious beliefs?
Yeah, so I originally got into it because I knew that I wanted to do something that would hopefully improve people's like happiness in their lives or just health. I was an exercise science major, and I wanted to maybe be like some sort of athletic trainer or coach, like a strength coach. But eventually, I thought, well, I feel like, there's an argument, there's a debate to be had. It's not a hill I'm interested in dying on, but I generally thought I could help more people in psychology. I thought because even in your physical training, your psychology is like, that's a huge, huge component of it. Like whether or not you're going to have a good workout or stick to it in the long run and goal set and all the rest. So anyway, I thought psychology would be it would have a greater potential for me to help people. And as a Christian, it's interesting that, so it's probably true, sometimes people will say psychology is biased against Christianity. In some ways that's true. I mean, like, there are a lot of people in psychology that are not fans of Christianity. They think it's conservative, like traditional and repressive and all that. And when I say conservative, I don't mean necessarily, I think they probably associate it to some degree politically with conservatism, but I mean just like social, traditional type of values that they would generally people in academia would clash with. And at the same time, many of the studies in psychology, and I would say the majority of the studies in psychology, I think actually corroborate Christianity in, loosely speaking, in at least indirect ways. And that definitely has been interesting to find out. There are a lot of interesting studies that are relevant, I think, in apologetics, and that by learning about the research, it's been very helpful for me personally.
All right. So, since you do your own debate channel, and you obviously have had many of those debates that you've hosted, what would you say is your favorite debate topic and your favorite debater in general?
That's a great question. I think Mike Jones is definitely one of my favorites and one of the best. I think it's because it's true. There's like in the moment type debate skill, and Mike has that for sure. He has those skills. But there's also the preparation that goes into a debate, which I think is under, and I mean, maybe I'm partly at fault for why it's underutilized by most people because, we're always like, we're hosting a lot of debates and not a lot of people have that much time to prep, especially because 1 to 2 weeks out seems to be the sweet spot. If I invite somebody to come on and the next week or two, they're like, yeah, sure, I'll debate. And if it's like more than that or less than that, they're usually like, not enough time, or it's too far away, come back to me later. That doesn't leave a lot of time to prepare. But Mike Jones, oftentimes his debates will discuss the possibility of them a month before, because he'll want a month to prepare for each debate. So I would say that his style is my favorite. And topic-wise, I think that probably the social utility debates I personally find most interesting. I definitely enjoy debates on like whether or not Jordan Peterson has done more harm than good for society. Those are really interesting. I think debates on whether or not Christianity or atheism have done more harm than good for society, those are really interesting. And I definitely enjoy the classics like Does God Exist and Did Jesus Rise from the Dead? But as a general rule, I think those more practical social type debates I enjoy more. So it's really fun when kind of getting to hear people summarize like the literature. Like let's say they say, hey, here's a meta-analysis in psychology, like Mike Jones has done this. Here's a meta-analysis, and it shows that there are these positive correlations between religiosity and these health outcomes, these like mental health outcomes, or maybe even physical health. That's really interesting to get to hear about those. There's something about patterns in the world that I get a kick out of learning about. It's really intriguing to kind of learn like, it's like as a general rule, this seems to be the case. I think it gives the world a little bit more structure. In my mind, at least.
Speaking of the debates, you tend to get criticism by some people on both sides by having quote-unquote low-hanging fruit on the show. Like, not going to name names, but I think you know who they mean. Like, I know you had representatives of both sides to discuss it one time. It was like months ago. Like, would you like to explain your take on the matter?
Yeah, definitely. I think that there's a couple of things. One is, it's true we sometimes have, whether it be Christian or atheist, because I mentioned to you earlier before we went on air that some like just recently there was a debate where people were like, hey, why are you having this atheist on? He makes us look bad. And I was like, no, I don't think he's that bad. Like, I didn't think he was bad at all, really. So it's kind of subjective, but even in the cases where everybody agrees, it's, I think, balanced by the fact that we also have very good debaters. So if we have a lousy Christian debater, which, sometimes we have some that are new to the game or maybe just slower at developing, they are balanced by the fact that we have good Christian debaters, like Inspiring Philosophy or whoever else. And
then there's a certain someone who's been at this for a decade or so, and he's come back recently, and like kids debate better than him. kids on your show you've had on your show?
Well, I mean, one kid, like Gregory, can out-debate most adults, though, because he's a prodigy.
He's pretty smart.
But I mean, I think that one thing to keep in mind is the last thing I want to do is deplatform people. And the reason is, I think that when you do start pushing people out of the public sphere of discussion, they don't give up. Most of them don't. A lot of them are ideologues or idealists. They're not going to quit. They might even be more inspired. So now you're pushing them underground, where you think that they tend to come up with more nefarious. And I'm not saying that, like, I don't think like flat earthers are going to come up with like nefarious plans. I think that like some of the more political, controversial people will come up with more nefarious plans underground. But I think the other thing too is it's not like they're going to go away. My hope is that if we do have, like, I'm not a flat earther, I'll moderate fairly for flat earthers if they want to come on, but I'll just say that I don't think it's true.
At least I sincerely hope not.
Right, and if they come on, or I should say, if I don't have them on, and somebody hears them elsewhere where it's not a debate, and they don't get to hear the opposition against the flat earther, that kind of reveals the faults in the arguments of the flat earthers, well, then now people are, to a greater extent, going to hear flat earth views, and they won't have heard the counter arguments toward those views, which I think is a bad thing. So I think that debates, even if we do have people who are representing views that are not particularly, they don't seem plausible, or maybe the debaters themselves stink, or maybe it's both, I think that it's kind of balanced out in the end. And I think it outweighs, I think the benefits from that outweigh the negatives that might come from deplatforming.
All right. That's actually very reasonable. All right, the next question I have for you is, very often anti-theists will go into how religious people have cognitive dissonance and suffer through the Dunning-Kruger effect. As a person who knows the literature in, like, psychology, how would you respond to those sort of claims?
Do I understand right? So sorry, it's just that at the end of the day, sometimes I'm a little bit, like, sleepy. Did you say that the anti-theists would talk about the Dunning-Kruger effect among Christians?
Yeah, and, like, cognitive dissonance.
Yeah, I mean, I think that you can think of things, every group is represented, generally speaking, by a bell curve. And so we see, it's that classic bell curve in statistics. And it's where you have most people are in the middle in terms of how much they have of a certain variable. And give me one sec, I just realized something. So it's that they're in the middle with regard to that one variable. Most people in the middle, they are, what's the word I'm looking for? They have an average amount of it. Some people have an awful lot of it. Some people have very little of it. And those are the people in the very little, who have very little of it, they're on the far left lip of the bell. People who have very much of it are on the far right lip of the bell, and they're in very small amounts. And every group's like that, to where I can tell you that it's the same thing with Christians, atheists, Muslims. All of them have the Dunning-Kruger effect. I mean, sometimes I see atheists leave comments where I'm like, they'll say, like, oh, this guy looked like he was just saying this. And I'm like, that's just not what he said. It's not at all what he said. Now, I don't respond because I don't want to seem partial, but the point is, they'll assert it so confidently, even though they have no idea what they're talking about. And so I would say the best data from psychology suggests that unless you have a very good, like, scientifically, methodologically sound study that you can point to, it's plausible that every group has these types of things like cognitive dissonance or bias in favor of their own view, as Pine Creek likes to discuss, that it's like everybody has those. Every group has those. And every group has people who have a lot of those, or an average amount of those, or very little of those. But nonetheless, it's consistent across groups. And you could say these bell curve type degrees.
Since Pine Creek's part of the straight epistemology cult, he likes to pull that a lot. Like, try to fish out other people's biases while having his own. Like, he doesn't like when you reverse that on him.
Yeah, it's I know that he loves those types of arguments, but it's strange that,
like, you had him on your show one time, and he literally interrogated inspiring philosophy for an hour.
Yeah, I wish that it wasn't so one-sided, because it's like, I mean, at one time I had Mike Jones was debating an atheist who I won't name, but the atheist said during the debate, the Christian asked, like, do you have any, I think it was Mike Jones, they asked, like, do you have any bias, like, in favor of your view, lack of belief, atheism, or whatever you want to define it as, or against Christianity? And the atheist just said, no, none. And I was like, what? Like, that, even just, you have to at least admit you have, like, the foundational, like, biases that other people have, like confirmation bias or whatever else. And so I'm, like, kind of, like, shocked when I hear that. It's bizarre when they think that they don't have biases as well. And, an example would be sometimes they'll blast the Christian God, and they'll be like, oh yeah, like, man, the God of the Old Testament is so immoral, blah, blah, blah. And then they'll turn around and be like, oh yeah, like, no, I'm not biased. Like, I'd be happy if it were true. And it's like, wait, you just said that you thought God is, like, evil. And now you're saying that you're like, oh yeah, I have no preference if that God existed. It's like, wait, what? Like,
You're
what do
not
you mean you have
bad God.
It's like, why? How could you say that you would have no preference? It's like, if you think God is evil, wouldn't you prefer he didn't exist? I mean, like, I would not want a tyrant type of God. Like, so
unless you're a pagan, then you might believe in Thor or Odin. Or Zeus.
Yeah. And I think that, but the pagans, I think, believe that in those cases, and they have their biases too, but I think they believe that despite Thor's, imperfections, they would say that he still has, like, good traits, maybe. And some of the atheists I encounter would say, like, no, the Christian God is just evil. Like, look at the Old Testament. That's unforgivable, and nothing can make up for that.
Really, because the Old Testament's all they got. Point to that. To make
It's
that
definitely
assumption.
It's interesting how commonly the conversation goes to that.
A discussion I've always thought about would be, is Jesus, like, on a discussion question would be, is Jesus evil? Like, where, because then they might have to they'd be forced to sort of use the New Testament.
Well, yeah, he told you to hate your family, even though he said to love your enemies, so that literally makes no sense. So their best answer to that is, well, he's inconsistent. I'm like, that's the best you can come up with? That he's inconsistent?
Well, I mean, what's funny about that is they forget that the notions of love and hate in a collectivist honor society is much different than the notions of love and hate that we have in an individualistic sort of guilt society.
Normally when they rail against the Christian God, they're just railing against the Jewish version of God. Like, back in the Old Testament, people tended to project their culture and sensibilities onto God. Like, that's why God appears more, like, shall we say, evil by modern standards, like, according to them anyway. Like, although if Jesus was who he said he was, then he represents what God is like, God's real character.
Yeah. Like, the final question I actually have in regards to the channel is, what would you say is your goals for the channel, James? Like, do you have any projects that you would like to see you do on your channel? Any debates that you would like to see had? Any debaters that you would want to get on? You know, lay it out.
Let's see. We definitely want to grow, not for the purpose of like numbers, but for the purpose of influence. One thing I'm like surprised, like sometimes like content creators say, well, we don't tell people to subscribe, and I'm like, okay, but if you believe that what you're putting out as content is valuable, like, why not? Like, if you think it would be of value to people, but you won't tell them to subscribe, like, or remind them to subscribe, or to consider subscribing. And so the reason that I do encourage people to subscribe is because I think that we are putting out what I hope to be debates that are played on an even playing field. And so the long story short of it is, we're working hard to hopefully get our name out, because I just don't think it's something that's done. I don't think it's very common out there. Like you had mentioned, some atheist channels will host debates, but they're not always that fair. And same thing with Christian channels, to be fair. Like sometimes they're not always fair. So sometimes they kind of have a slant. So I definitely do want to grow. We're hoping, like, it would be great to hit maybe like 10,000 subscribers by the end of the year. I mean, that would be an exciting thing to see, that kind of growth and influence. And I'm so encouraged by when people give positive feedback. Like, that's honestly means so much for me. So the other thing is, we are excited to hopefully host, and this is Lord willing, depending on how things go. We are still confirming it because we have to get word back from Destiny, but we're hoping to host Destiny and Mike Jones from Inspiring Philosophy next month, which I think will be our biggest debate that we've ever had. So that would definitely be a blast.
What's that going to be about?
Does God exist?
So I would assume Destiny would be answering in the negative.
That's right. Yeah, I think that he is. He's not a new atheist, but he would definitely be willing to take the stance that there's no evidence for God, or at least it's negligible.
Well, even some atheists have to admit that there is evidence for God. One can argue whether sufficient evidence or not.
Yeah.
I mean, even like guys like Paul Draper, who's an agnostic, he says, yeah, there is evidence for God. I just don't think it's sufficient enough to warrant a belief in God. Like, you know, and that's and Graham Opie, from last time I seen William Lane Craig review like one of his works, and Craig had said like in the there that Opie had basically said that Opie said that theists have, you know, evidence, but he just simply says that the evidence for naturalism is as good, if not better, and is more simpler. So
yeah,
I mean,
Graham Uppy's one of the more likable ones. He debated Ed Fazer on Capturing Christianity a few times.
I like him. He's very intelligent man.
Yeah, and a nice guy.
Yeah. But yeah, I think that it would be a very good debate. Me and HistoryNet have hosted Michael Jones before, and he's a pretty good guy when it comes to knowing philosophy. We actually got to touch more on him with stuff like the LGBTQ community, because that is a big. I think that's probably one of the biggest arguments that anti-theists actually go for, is the bigotry that goes along with the Christian LGBTQ community.
Yeah, but they like to pretend that atheist homophobes don't exist.
I mean, I think it's not that they don't acknowledge that they don't exist. It's just that in America, it's just like it's a very rare thing to see them.
While the worst place in the world to be gay is atheist China.
Well, yeah, pretty much any socialist place is the worst because I mean it's sort of for obvious reasons if you think about it from a sociological perspective. If ultimately the government's in control of everything, that means the government is going to have to incentivize, taxes, and that means they're going to have to, have more sustainable, like, they have to incentivize families in order to pay the taxes. And who has less kids than gay people?
Well, anyway, James, I have one more question for you. Like, doing your hosting debates, like, is there anything atheists or Christians say that make you like rethink your position or just think about it often? That's a yes.
No, I'm honestly not sure. I'm trying to think. I don't want to sound. I think part of it is some debates I don't get to watch afterwards because a lot of times I try to watch it after or download it after and listen to it because my attention is split during the debate. So it's possible, and I don't always get to do that, obviously. So if we're having a lot going on, it's harder. So I may be missing certain things, but as a general rule, because I've been reading this stuff and watching these debates for 10 years, there definitely are a lot of new arguments I hear, but I would say there really aren't any that give me a significant boost in my belief in Christianity or a significant decrease in my belief in Christianity. I know it's not an interesting answer, but I think that after the master's degrees in both psychology and philosophy, like the mind can't help but wander, and sometimes your mind will attack its own worldview. Like so I think a lot of times people like, especially like atheists, new atheist types, think like, oh yeah, like these Christians don't challenge themselves. It's like I ruminate sometimes on the what some would call weak points on my own worldview. Like I've definitely politically I've moved all over the place in the last 5 years, 10 years, but I wouldn't say it's as much because of the debate channel as much as I've just kind of like thought through different like issues and stuff that have made me kind of change my mind in some cases, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that does make sense. I mean, I was expecting you to say that your favorite debate ever was that totally awesome debate between that RC fellow and that Brass fellow on the historicity of the virgin birth.
That was an interesting debate. I really enjoyed that, and one of the reasons is because we don't get to do those types of like, I don't know if you'd call them spin-off debates, like, but they're interesting and they make it way more fun than just doing Does God Exist every single night.
I was listening to that on the bus to New York, and I was just laughing at you know what.
Well, yeah, I remember it was actually funny because it was sort of a big, like, a bunch of circumstances just happened to come together because I remember I had asked you, James, about, like, wanting to do a debate on that, like, I think in November, like, late November, and it just so happened that the time that we got to actually do the debate was right before Christmas, which that was just completely accidental. It all came together pretty good.
It was awesome and it was well timed because I think that doing it around Christmas time made it a lot more fun as well. And we are actually working on setting up a couple of debates on Halloween, namely whether or not Halloween is a sin or demonic. So that should be interesting.
Or whether the pumpkin crew should get lost.
Oh yeah, I don't know I don't know if you mean the Pumpkin Crew, which is which, but
those who are virtue signaling for Mr. Atheist.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Trying to piss off the NIFB and that one guy who called Mr. Atheist the biggest fruit since the pumpkin.
That's funny. That's pretty weird. Yeah, I haven't watched those channels, but I believe that it's...
So basically, you piss them off and make them hate you more.
I remember, it was just funny as for me because I actually had to... I went on their Facebook and I actually just railed on them for like probably 10 to 15 minutes about that stuff. I actually got in contact with Inspiring Philosophy and showed him about it. And that's when I got, that's when he actually posted a post condemning them. So,
I didn't read that one. What did he say?
Oh, he just said, like, he basically just reposted Shit and Q's video on it.
Yeah.
And he said how these are vile people and they don't represent Christianity like that.
Yeah, we us and Comrade did a live stream on that, the thumbnails of a rainbow cake, but yeah.
Yeah, so I think it was overall, I think it is a good thing that Christians are starting, like at least in the YouTube community of theists, that they're actually starting to come together more and fighting against those sort of people. Because I think Christians Christians like that are less likely to care about what atheists say about them, but if they have their own, like, other Christians telling them, that sort of stings a lot more.
Yeah, the funny thing is, Matt Powell actually commented on one of my videos, like refuting rationality trademark rules, and he's like, rationality rules is a fool, and I'm like, so are you.
That was funny. But yeah, I think that overall, there is a lot of debates I would like to see happen. Like, whenever I think about getting in debates myself, I always say the topic has to be something different. Like, I recommended like the historicity of the virgin birth because really, how often do you hear that debate?
Right, that's true.
And that's what I sort of like. I don't want to just have the stock. I mean, I get those, like, I get why those debates have to happen, like on evolution and on God's existence and whether or not Jesus rose from the dead. I'm not knocking people that actually do those sort of debates. I'm just saying, personally, for me, I like to just, like, if I'm going to go out of my way, I feel like and really prep and do the work for the debate, I want it to be on a topic that people don't often have in their face.
And don't you have second thoughts about certain debate topics? Like if you let people debate it on your channel, that it what's the word I'm looking for? It makes their position valid.
No, not really. Just because, I mean, one of them has to be wrong. So I don't know if like if there's especially like if the answers are contradictory, like
you're dignifying their position by letting them debate it.
No, I don't know if I would. I don't know if it does give it dignity. I mean, it depends on what your thresholds are for dignity, but I think that even if it is negative, the fruits of allowing people to see refutations of that view will outweigh the negatives of that view being allowed to be spoken on the channel. Because a lot of these views, like flat earther stuff, like, it's not like if my channel, or even if most debate channels, or even if all debate channels stopped having them, it's not like all the flat earthers would just go away. They would just be on their own channels, peddling their own stuff.
Yeah,
so
flat earthers, Christ mythers, all of them.
Yeah, so I think that...
deniers.
So I wouldn't deny that there's maybe some negative that comes out of it, like maybe there is, and maybe it in some way dignifies the position, and that, again, that depends on how you define it, but even conceding that, I think that it would be, the juice is worth the squeeze.
Oh,
that's a way of putting it.
Yeah, I mean, a debate topic to come up would be, does a does an elephant come from a rock?
Or a pine tree.
Yeah.
That's true. I know Kent Hovind is your guys' favorite debater. We're gonna have him on next month though, so don't worry, he's coming back.
Well, I'm trying to think of what. Oh yeah, God didn't make ducks with what they call it. Oh yeah, God didn't make ducks with steering wheels.
Let's see.
I always found it funny. It's like,
and that one guy on Non Sequitur. So this guy was supposedly a cop in New York, but he went up against Aaron Ron Nelson, and he's like, "Oh, this Pokemon evolution. What if I flap my arms like a bird?"
oh, I remember that was when Cy Guard actually got on because Aaron just bailed on it. Like he just threw the mic down.
Yeah, he rage quit, and then Gauss Engineer had to go after him for a half an hour for what little good that did, and then Cy Guard had to pop in to save the day.
I know, and I remember that was just so funny because Cy Guard said, "That's not evolution, that's Pokemon evolution." Cy's the guy. I always say that. We actually were able to host him as well. I mean, that's always our purpose on these sort of things. Is we also want to have we want to find people that their voices aren't often heard. That's why we had Atheist Republican.
Republican, not to be confused with Atheist Republic.
Yeah, no, this is actually a good group. But yeah, Laura from Atheist Republican, we got her on here because that's not like Republican atheists aren't really that represented in the atheist groups. So
they're a hell of a lot more tolerable than the liberal atheists.
Oh yeah, of course. But yeah, we'll be wrapping up pretty soon because we're almost at an hour.
Yeah.
Is there any final questions you'd want to ask James?
Oh yeah. So, what's the main goal of your guys' channel? Like, or I should say maybe several goals if you have, like, if it's like multi-goal.
There are several goals. One is to build bridges with non-believers who are able to live and let live, because they're not our enemy. We just go after the ideologues who can't live and let live, like, on both sides. That's anti-theists and fundagelicals. Our other goal is to educate people on biblical historical context, like beyond the caricatures of what you get from new atheists and face value interpretations from fundagelicals. And our final goal is to pretty much refute the anti-theist propaganda wherever you see it.
And, for me, my own goal would be to be able to interview people that, they don't have the biggest voices in a community and sort of give them a platform so they can just have a place to just go out. I like to find, underrepresented, like, minorities of minority groups and just bring them forward and have a discussion with them.
Even though my tiny channel is underrepresented, it's demonetized.
Oh, that's lovely. But I mean, yeah, that's my sort of goal. And also to educate people more on history, I would say is like one of my other biggest things.
That ties in with one of the goals I stated.
Yeah.
That's really cool.
Yeah, so I would say Purple Pill Philosophy is sort of a mixture of, it's sort of educational. Plus,
also once in a great while, upload videos pertaining to 90s nostalgia.
Yeah,
nice.
I'm a 90s fetishist.
Me too.
It was the last great. It was the last great decade before the world lost its damn mind.
Yeah, it's kind of true. It's but no, that's cool. I really appreciate your guys' goals. I think that it's good for two reasons. One, because it's authentic. Like, you guys are like, hey, like, this is just who we are. Like, we're not ideologues. Like, let's kind of provide you could almost say, safe haven for people who don't want to get swept up in the polarization. And also, I think it's It's actually at some point the polarization has to start, like the tide has to start coming back. And what I mean by that is that the pendulum kind of swings, I think, to where it's like it might be more polarized for a while and then less, more polarized and less. And right now it's polarized and extreme, but soon, I think sooner than later, it will start becoming more even-handed, like your guys' channel. And so my hope is that a lot of people will come to that channel or to your channel and see like, oh, this is nice. Like these guys are kind of ahead of the game in terms of like where the culture is going. So I would like to encourage people, because I've enjoyed both of you guys as people, as well as your even-handedness in getting to see you guys, whether it be on Twitter, express your ideas, or YouTube, or wherever it is. And so I would like to encourage anybody watching this, please do subscribe here at Purple Pill Philosophy, as I think that you'll get a lot of value from this channel in the way that I've enjoyed the interactions that I've had with both of you guys, whether it be on YouTube or off YouTube as well.
I am kind of an asshole on Twitter, but dealing with loons on a regular basis kind of wears off on me.
Well, yeah. I mean, and to me personally, like, I just tell people this on Twitter. That's just my thing. I just troll people the entire time I'm on Twitter. That's just sort of my.
Sense.
I mean, if someone legitimately wants an intellectual conversation with me, I'll have it. But if someone's just like, if they're not really open to that, you know, then I'm gonna at least get some enjoyment out of the conversation by trolling them. So, yeah, that's sort of how my stick is on Twitter, at least. But I'm always open to more intellectual conversations if, like, someone's actually honest and wants them.
All right, buddy. It's been good having you on.
Thank you, guys. I really appreciate it, and I hope you guys take care.
Go collectively subscribe to Modern Day Debate. Pronto.
Thank you.
In Purple Pill Philosophy, we renamed the channel. The project, it is Purple Pill Philosophy with the hard reality of the red with the appeal of the blue. See you next time.